beautiful friends. My name is Carrie Cox, and welcome to my channel where we learn how to use our personal power to build a connection between our mind, body, and spirit. If this is your first time here, please hit the subscribe button and smash that bell notification button so that you can be notified when I release future videos. In this video, I'm going to do a book review on the Magdalen Manuscript. When I had purchased this book, I purchased it through Amazon, and when I received it in the mail, I have never had an experience with a book where when I took it out of the package, it was literally vibrating in my hands. I could feel the power in this book, and I could feel the high vibration of this book. So I knew when I read this book was going to be life-changing for me. And because it was so life-changing for me, and it really helped me understand my own twin flame journey and concepts that I have heard, I really wanted to do a review and read some of it to you so that you could get a taste of or a feel for this book and read it yourself, because it was very enlightening for me. We become self-illuminating when we work on our inner selves. And we get a choice to heal ourselves, to seek truth, and to raise our consciousness. To do this, we have to remember that our life experiences are our greatest teachers. And even our past life experiences are things that we can learn from as well. But the problem is we just have to try and remember what those are. And so when we are learning things about ourselves and using those past experiences, it really brings us more into an alignment of who we really are and who we truly are. And this is how we find happiness and joy in our life, is by finding that true, authentic expression of ourself, of who we really are. And I believe that the power of this book has really helped me be able to tap into my own feminine energy and to understand my own twin flame journey. Now, you don't have to be on a twin flame journey to read this book and to get something out of this. There's actually two different pathways of reaching this inner alchemy, and that is either in a sacred relationship with your twin flame or on a solitary path. And so in this book, they go over both ways of achieving that same goal. So this book was not written or intended for twin flames, but being a twin flame and reading this book, there's so much similarity within it. And so when it was recommended to me by someone who had said, Jesus and Mary Magdalene were twin flames, and you can really get a big picture of that in the channeling of this book. And it was so true. And the amazing part of all of it for me was there were so many aspects of my own personal twin flame journey with my twin that I could relate to in this book between Mary Magdalene and Yeshua. There were so many instances when I recorded reading this book for all of you, and I did not read the entire book in this video. I only read Mary Magdalene's manuscript. If you want to read the rest of the book, you will have to purchase it, because that would have just been too long to read the whole thing. But as I was reading it, I wanted to stop so many times and say, oh yes, this specific thing happened to me, just more in modern time in a different way, but the theme behind it was still the same. And so there were so many times that came up in reading that I didn't want to skew away from the power behind Mary Magdalene's words. So I don't interject any of my own personal story in there. It is strictly just me reading her manuscript in her words. But there was so much that I could relate to, that if you're on a twin flame journey, I know there's going to be so many parts of this that you could relate to as well. And if you're not on a twin flame journey, this is going to help you understand, maybe why you want to try and manifest and start working on yourself so that you can bring in and attract your twin flame. Because having this sacred relationship is so powerful and so healing, and I mean, there's pure ecstasy and pure bliss when you have this sort of relationship. But even if you aren't trying to find a twin flame relationship, having this powerful relationship with yourself is just as powerful, because remember, we all have masculine and feminine within us. So we can have that externally with our twin flame, but we also have that within us. So you don't have to be with your twin flame to experience the divine feminine and the divine masculine balance, because we have that inside all of us. And our Western culture cuts us off from that feminine aspect of ourself. And so there's a lot of wounds around all of our feminine energies, which leads to spiritual disease. And this isn't just in women, because men also have masculine and feminine within them. So these wounds are also within men too. The way the body works is we have to achieve balance. The body's main goal is homeostasis. The body wants to find balance in everything it does. So physically, the body will compensate using other muscles that don't normally do that job physically. If it's a physical compensation, it will take from other systems or functions of other systems in the body to compensate if it needs to. But it's always going to find balance within itself, because that's how the body lives. It has to be in balance. So we also have this aspect, or this nature, this energy within us that is our masculine and feminine, and it actually shows up in the body. I can tell when I'm working on people's body, if all of their issues show up on the right side, there's probably some wounds with their masculine energy or with a masculine in their life. So we can also use these aspects to help us figure out what needs to be healed within us. Balancing our masculine and feminine is a must. It is a must to survive. It is a must if we want to be healthy, because if we are not in alignment with our masculine and feminine within ourselves, we will manifest some sort of illness or disease. And that's a given. We need to have this balance in order to survive. In order to achieve joy and peace and happiness in our life, we have to have balance between our mind, our body, and our spirit. Our spirit has this longing to be, but it's rejected from our experiences in this world. And that feedback shows up in our bodies, and I see it in my clients, whether it's rounded shoulders or really tight hips or asthma. So in order to achieve this balance, we have to remember that we don't want our feminine energy to be a dominating force, but an equal force. So for many centuries, the pendulum has been swinging really strong to the masculine side, where we are forced and conditioned to always be on our masculine energy and to repress our feminine energy. And this has created a lot of societal wounds, a lot of collective wounds. And we don't want to swing the pendulum the other way, because if we swing the pendulum the other way, we're creating a dominating force now, creating more wounds for both the masculine and the feminine. We want to balance this out and create an equal force. And we want to create an equal force in our collective energy as a society. Within ourselves, we want to balance depending on our natural dominating force. So 80% of women naturally have a feminine energy that dominates over the masculine energy within them. And 80% of men have a masculine energy that dominates over them. And so if you are in that 80%, then you want to make sure that within yourself, your feminine energy is dominating over your masculine energy. If you are a man and you resonate more with your feminine energy and you have more of a feminine energy than a masculine energy, then you also want to be more in alignment with your force of feminine energy than your masculine energy, because that by nature is where you naturally are supposed to be. It's society that shuts that down and represses that within us. And so going on your own inner journey and learning how to balance that is what helps you bring all of that into alignment. In my line of work, I am blessed that I get to help people. I get to help men and women find that power within them and take it back. Because every time a woman finds her feminine power, it gets us closer collectively to the return of Sophia. And every time a man honors the women in his life, he's honoring the feminine within himself. And I'm very fortunate that I get to live a life with my twin flame who definitely honors me as a divine feminine and protects and takes care of me the way a masculine is supposed to be the container for the feminine, so that I can feel safe to tap into my feminine energy. Because feminine energy is all about feeling safe and feeling safe to express herself, to feel safe to receive. And if she can't trust her masculine, then she cannot surrender to him and feel safe to do so. So I'm very fortunate that I have this very strong masculine man who honors me as a feminine and provides that safety, that security for me so that I can surrender to him, and I can surrender to him on every level. And that is why him and I can connect so deeply together, because I do feel safe with him and I do allow myself to surrender to him. Because at the end of the day, I have the power to choose who I want to surrender to, who I want to give my energy to. And every day I choose to give it to him because he is able to hold that space for me, to be that container for me. And that is what a divine masculine is able to do for his divine feminine. So if you would like to learn more about what Mary Magdalene is saying and the teachings in the book, then please purchase the book. I will put a link below in the description box below, an Amazon link that you can click on to purchase this book. If you do make a purchase of this book, I do receive a small commission if you click on this link, and that just helps me out in making future videos. I did not get this book for free. I bought it with my own money on Amazon, and so I'm not being paid to review this book or anything. I'm doing this because this book was so powerful for me that I wanted to share it with all of you. And I will read you what the back of the book says, just so you have a description of what this book is about. But it says that Mary Magdalene's personal story of her tantric relationship with Yeshua, known today as Jesus Christ, a love so deep it has survived over 2,000 years of lies, to be finally told now in this, the beginning of the ending of time. A high initiate of the Temple of Isis, Mary Magdalene was the Holy Grail, the cup that carried the blood of Christ, and the long prophesied son that was born to her was a girl named Sarah. In the Magdalen Manuscript given by her and reprinted here, word for word as she gave it, she describes the alchemy that she and Yeshua practiced. This is the alchemy that prepared him to sustain life after death so that he could meet his destiny and lay a trail of light through the death realms, a light path each of us can follow. This is her story, revealing some of the deepest secrets of the temples as requested by Isis. To this remarkable text, Tom Kenyon has added a comparison of the major streams of internal alchemy, plus an in-depth look at Egyptian high alchemy and a clarification of the Alchemies of Horus. Judy Sion, at the request of Mary Magdalene, has added one woman's story, which is every woman's story. So in this book, or the way this book was written, the very first beginning of this book is Tom's introduction to the Magdalen Manuscript, where he tells you how this book came to be, who he is, what he has done, and then Judy also gives, because the two of them wrote this book together, Judy also gives an introduction of this manuscript, and then the manuscript starts. And like I said, it's probably about 60 pages or so. And so I'm going to read for you the manuscript in the rest of this video, and then I will be making some future videos about some of the terms that are going to come up in this book, especially when they're talking about the sex magic of Isis, because that is all about the Kundalini awakening that happens within. You can have a Kundalini awakening with or without your twin flame. I happen to have had a Kundalini awakening when I met my twin flame. So this is a picture of the Kundalini, what happens in the body. And I will be doing a video or a couple of videos on that, because I actually have recently decoded and figured out what this actually, the physical decoding of this, and it, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense, and it's actually amazing when you put it all together. So I will be making future videos on that, but I really do want you to hear the Magdalen Manuscript. So in the rest of this video, it will be me just reading the manuscript. I hope you enjoy it. Please leave your comments below on what you think about Mary Magdalene's words. If you could identify with it, if it had any magic or power for you. I mean, it had so much magic and power for me, and it opened up so much for me within my own consciousness, within my mind, within my body. And so I hope that, you know, it does the same for you, and that you listen to the rest of this video, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you, my beautiful friends. Enjoy Mary Magdalene's manuscript. I was raised in the understanding of magic. My father was from Mesopotamia and my mother from Egypt. Before I was born, she prayed to Isis to bless her with a child. I am that child, and I was known as Mary Magdalene. When I was 12 years old, I was sent to study with a secret sisterhood of initiates under the wings of Isis. I was trained in the secrets of Egypt, the Alchemies of Horus, and the sexual magic of the Isis cult. When I met who you call Yeshua, I had passed all of my initiations. I had prepared for the meeting with him by the well. The Gospels recount me as a prostitute, for all initiates of my order wore a gold arm bracelet that was of a serpent. And it was understood that we practiced sexual magic, and in the eyes of the Hebrews, we were whores. When I saw Yeshua and our eyes met, I understood that we had been destined for each other. What I am about to tell you has not been known except by those who were with me. Many legends abound as to what happened, but for me, it was the story of deepest love. That Yeshua had a vision of the world does not touch me. My story is a love story. Many people followed Yeshua, and the opportunities for us to be alone together were very few. It was not written in the Gospels, for no one knew, only the closest to us. Before Yeshua went to the Garden of Gethsemane, we conceived a child, and her name was to be Sarah. 2. The story I'm about to tell sounds fantastical. I remember the reeds of Mares de la Mar, although then, of course, it was not called that. It was a place where our boat came ashore. Sarah was quite young, not quite 1 year old. I was torn by grief and amazement. I was there when Yeshua was crucified. I saw him in the tomb and wrapped him with his mother beside me. I will forever remember the smell of myrrh. That was one of the ointments that we used. Yeshua appeared to me in his luminous light. I could not believe my eyes, and so I touched his wounds. The disciples were jealous that he had come to me first. It was strange to have my beloved transported to another realm, another world, while I and our daughter crossed the Mediterranean alone. We were no longer safe and had to leave Egypt, for that is where we had gone. When we crossed onto the shore of what was to become France, it was all wilderness. We were met by priestesses of the Isis cult, and we headed north to the protection of the Druids, for Isis had spoken to them, and they had heard the call to protect her daughter, Sarah. And so we headed north to another great body of water and crossed over what was to become England. And there we were, secreted up into the most sacred heart of the Druids, to the Tor, and to the Glastonbury. Although we were safer than we had been in Israel or Egypt, the Roman influence extended up into England as well, and we were hidden. We lived in this area for many years, and Sarah had wedded a man whose heirs would become the Templar Knights, and I went north into Wales and lived by the sea for the rest of my days. I will say this, in those years when I lived alone by the sea, Yeshua would often visit. Of course, it was not like before, for his body was more energy than flesh, more light, but still it was extraordinary to be with him again. When I died, he was there and took me into what some call heaven, but is just a place in the soul. 3. I begin my story at the well, for in many ways that is where my life truly began. All the years previous were preparation for this meeting. That morning I knew something was stirring, a kind of excitement, a trembling in the arms and legs. Before I even met him, I was already at the well when he arrived. I had already sunk my jar into the shaft, and he helped me raise it. Some of the apostles saw my gold serpent bracelet and, assuming me to be a whore, were aghast that the master would help such a one. But this did not touch me. I was in another world, transported by the eyes of Yeshua. When our eyes met, it was as if I was looking into all eternity, and I knew that he was the one that I had prepared for, and so did he. I continued at the fringes of those who followed him, and in the evenings we would go off together. Not every evening, for he was constantly sought after. I, who was trained in the Alchemies of Horus and the sex magic devices, was considered to be highly advanced by my teachers. Yet the first time in Yeshua's arms, I was a trembling woman, and I had to fight to find that central pathway through my desire to the highest throne, for that was my training. Yeshua and I, using the techniques that I had been trained in, as well as the methods he had learned in Egypt, were able to charge his ka, his energy body, with greater light and greater force so that he could more easily work with those who came to him. And so it was. And I still find it ironic that the Gospels report that I was at the well when Yeshua arrived. But those many nights when Yeshua and I were alone, he came to my well, to draw from me the powers of Isis, to build and strengthen himself. 4. I stand in time now looking at all of this as if it were a dream, and yet so still, vividly clear. My heart trembles as I recount the story as if it were yesterday. The first night with Yeshua is sketched within my mind as clear as the skies over Jerusalem. After I had been able to pass through the desires of myself as woman and ascend the path into spiritual alchemy in which I was trained, I could see Yeshua's spirit form, already luminous, already bright with light. A dove was above his head, golden rays of light poured forth from him. The seals of Solomon, of Hathor, of Isis, of Anubis, and Osiris were in his spirit form. They were the signs that he had passed through these initiations. There were other symbols I did not understand, for they had come from cultures I had no knowledge of or training in. But the Egyptian seals, which I knew he was on the path of the high god Horus. But he had not yet passed through his death initiation, and I knew in my trembling heart that this is why I had been drawn to him at this time, to fortify his soul with the powers of Isis and the Cosmic Mother so that he could pass through the dark portals and attain the Horus. That night, after we had made love and welded and blended our spirit bodies together, the action of alchemy having begun between us, Yeshua drifted off to sleep. As I held him in my arms, I felt a turning within me, a desire to protect him, a desire to always be with him, and the knowledge, like the edge of a cold knife, that would be parted by forces greater than my desire. 5. The church would have you believe I was a whore, but I tell you now that the church is the whore, for she would have you believe that woman is tainted and that the sexual passions between a man and a woman are evil. Yet is here in the magnetics of passion that the womb of ascension is created. The secret of secrets was known by all initiates of Isis, and yet I had never imagined that I would be the one to bring it to the fullest expression in union with such a one as Yeshua. For me, this journey is of my spirit and heart. But for those who wish to know the physical journey, after Yeshua's crucifixion, I and his mother Mary Joseph of Arimathea, his 12-year-old son named Aaron, and 2 other women set off from northern Egypt. Our course took us ironically east before we could turn westward, and we had to stop for provisions along the way, as our boat was very small. Our path took us to Malta and the tiny island of Udish, from there to Sardinia and to the tip of what is now the Cinque Terre, finally landing at Santas Mares de la Mar, and making our trek northward through Renesel Chateau into northern France and across the channel into what is now England. We settled in Glastonbury for several years until Sarah was 12. Upon her 12th birthday, we set forth for the place among the reeds where we had landed. There, as close to Egypt as was safe for us to go, I initiated my daughter into the cult of Isis and bathed her into the waters of the Mediterranean in accordance with the teachings I had been given. We then returned to Glastonbury until Yeshua's and my daughter Sarah wedded at age 16. She married into a well-known family whose heirs became the Templars, although at that time the Templar Knights did not exist. This family bloodline through Sarah would be carried into the Templars themselves. When Sarah was married and secure in her new life, I headed north for Wales and lived in a small stone cottage by the sea for the rest of my days. Behind my cottage there was a stream that came out of the hill, and I would sit there many days. For there was a time when the stream split into 2, and the 2 streams followed each other, and then one veered off to the left and one veered to the right. And I would sit there in between them, thinking about the stream of my life and the stream of Yeshua's, how for a while our lives flowed together and then parted. 6. I will forever remember the first time Yeshua came to me after his resurrection. It was a new moon and the sky was clear. A light fog hung over the heather, and everything was silver from the light of the moon and stars. I saw a figure approaching me on the windy trail that led to my cottage. Ironically, I had just gone outside to draw water from the well, and there he was. He looked the same, yet with a radiance unmistakable. My eyes filled with tears. My heart trembled. I ran to him, stopping short. I remembered his words to me right after his resurrection. "Do not touch me yet," he said, "for I am not ascended to the Father." Oh, how I, an initiate of Isis, have yearned all these years to set the record straight. What did he mean by those words? For the Christians have inherited only part of the truth. The greater part of the truth is hidden within the mysteries of the Great Mother. And because the Church sought to disenfranchise women and all that is feminine, it sealed away this truth. And the truth has to do with the Ka body itself. What we learned as initiates to call the etheric double or spiritual twin, for the Ka body, when charged with enough energy and vitality, looks like the physical body. But unlike the physical body, the Ka body is not made of flesh, but of energy itself, energy and light. And so when Yeshua came to me after his resurrection, he was in his Ka, but it had not been stabilized yet, for he had not gone to the Father, meaning into the great spirit of his own soul. So before he could do this, he had to pass through the portal of death and travel through the underworld of his own being. He did this for 2 reasons, as I understood it. The first, as a master soul, to do such things bring great power to the Ka. And the second reason was to cut a passage through death itself, so that others could follow and pass through the dark world more easily by following the trail of his light. And so this first night when we were rejoined, I feel it now, still vividly clear and strong, my heart filled with joy at being with him again. He came to me that night just before midnight and left just before dawn. In those hours we lay together, our Ka bodies interconnecting yet again. No need for talk. Our communication was telepathic, and without the physical act of sex, the serpent power within him joined the serpent power within me, and climbed upward along the paths of our spine to the throne of our crown of our head, sending me into sheer ecstasy and bliss. And this is how it was for many years. He would come to me this way several times each year. Sometimes we would speak, Most of the time it was in union. I asked him where he would go in the times we were not together. He said that he had gone to many secret places throughout the earth, that he had met with many different people. He said that he was laying a path of light. During one of his visits, I asked him to explain this rather strange concept to me. He drew a circle onto the dirt floor of my cottage, and then what I recognized as two triangles intercepting to make the seal of Solomon, becoming the Star of David. He said that there were many lands that we in this part of the world did not have knowledge of. Many of the lands had points corresponding to the points of the seal of Solomon. By going to these areas, he was ensuring that his work would take a deeper rooting into the soil of the world. 7. Of all the times he had visited, the time that stands out the strongest is the time he came when Sarah had come to visit. She had just become pregnant and wished to see me for my blessing, and so I was thrilled to see her and her traveling companions. She had sent word of her coming through the Druids, but their word got to me only one day before her arrival. She stayed with me 3 days, and on the second night, Yeshua appeared. I don't know if you can appreciate how odd it was, for Sarah had never met her father, nor Yeshua, his daughter, and yet here they met for the first time. And her father's body had returned to the elements in a flash of light in his resurrection, so now he was in his Ka body, which emitted a kind of unmistakable light. Both of them were moved, Sarah to tears and Yeshua to great pathos. They spent an hour together just themselves, walking outside. I don't know what they talked about, but from the time they began until the time they ended, the sky was filled with falling stars. Before Yeshua had left that evening, just before dawn, as was his way, he placed his hands over Sarah's stomach and blessed the child. Sarah left me that day filled with an unmistakable sense of peace. And so I have told you what I wish to say about my life as a mother, and now I will turn my story to me as an initiate to the Alchemies of Horus, unto the secrets of Isis. 8. I turn now to my beloved sister, my sister in spirit, the mother of Yeshua, also known as Mary. Mary was a high initiate in the cult of Isis, having received her training in Egypt. That is why when she and Joseph fled the king's wrath in Israel, they took flight into Egypt, for she had safety there among the priestesses and priests of Isis. Her training was different than mine, yet we served the same. In order for me to explain my understanding of Mary, I must explain one of the deepest secrets of the Isis cult, for it was believed, and I hold this to be true, that under certain conditions the goddess herself would incarnate either at birth or through spiritual initiation. Mary, the mother of Yeshua, when she was quite young, was recognized for her purity of spirit by the great priestesses of the Isis temples. She was trained as an initiate and reached the highest levels. But rather than becoming a priestess, she was trained to become what is called an incarnate. To be an incarnate is to be a very highly advanced soul and requires undergoing tremendous spiritual training and discipline. In a final initiation, Mary became the holder of an energy stream directly from Isis herself. In this regard, she was an embodiment of the cosmic mother. It is as if there were two Mary the human, pure of spirit and heart, holding with her a direct portal into the great mother, the creatrix of all matter, of all time and space. Thus the table was set, so to speak, for the conception of being of remarkable qualities who would become her son, Yeshua. When Mary underwent what the Church refers to as the Immaculate Conception, she was a witness to a celestial and galactic insemination process by which the Father Principle, or Spirit as we understood in the Isis cult, transferred his essence into Isis, the mother that receives the seed of the Father, matter receiving the impulse of spirit, and this highly refined and potent spiritual energy took root in Mary's womb and gave birth to Yeshua. 9. Mary was with the apostles when they came upon me at the well. She immediately recognized me as a fellow initiate by the gold serpent bracelet I wore on my arm, and by the seal of Isis which glowed within my Ka body, for Mary was quite clairvoyant and psychic. The first person whose eyes I met were those of Yeshua, and as I said, I felt transported into other worlds in his immense presence. The second person whose eyes I met were those of his mother. In her eyes was recognition and acknowledgement of my status as a fellow initiate within the Isis cult, and although her training had not been in sex magic as mine had been, she understood that I had been prepared for Yeshua. Between them, I felt lifted up on wings of transcendent love. I felt my spirit soar. Ironic then that the next eyes I would see were those of Yeshua's disciples who judged me to be a whore, and countless generations have held me this way. But I say to you that in Yeshua's eyes and those of his mother, I was not a whore, but a clear vessel for the healing and nurturing powers of Isis herself. There comes a time in a man's life, whether human or divine, when his mother cannot give him the essence of what he needs. Her love continues, but what is required is sustenance from another woman. I was that woman. Mary recognized me and my status and passed her son to me in that moment by the well. Mary and I had spent much time together, time in which we discussed Yeshua's work, his needs, and my place in his life. It was understood that I was a servant to a greater power. I had been trained for this, but I must tell you that the power of recognition still shakes me. I still tremble at his recognition. In those many nights and days together, Mary and I attended the needs of Yeshua and his disciples. And in that period, Mary and I became very close, for I loved her and I still love her. For her physical beauty, the purity of her heart and spirit, and the gentleness with which she dealt the world. I can say from my own clarity that Mary, having served as the vessel for Isis, as an incarnate, was a highly developed master, but now having served in these ways, her mastery and perfection, her spiritual perfection, is staggering. 10. She exists within the heavenly realms, her compassion and love continually flowing to all humans. She is available to all regardless of their beliefs. When someone calls upon her, know that they are heard. I wish now to clarify my understandings. I wish to speak about the sex magic of Isis cult and the Alchemies of Horus. I wish to reveal secrets that an initiate would never have revealed, even under the threat of death. But the times are different now. Time as you know it is running out, and I have received permission from the goddess herself. Indeed, I have been asked by the goddess herself to reveal to you some of the most closely guarded secrets of all times. Those are revealed to you in hopes that you will elevate yourselves in time. 11. The Alchemies of Horus referred to a body of knowledge and methods for the alteration of the Ka body. In this understanding, as the Ka embodies or acquires greater energy and light, there is an increase in one's magnetic field, and that which the initiate desires becomes more quickly manifest. However, in surrender to one's own celestial soul or the Ba, the pursuit of personal desires, although not abandoned, is no longer the focus of one's entire existence. Instead, one looks upward, so to speak, to the higher capabilities of one's self as perceived through the Ba, or the celestial soul. The celestial soul, or Ba, exists within a much higher level of vibration than that of the physical body, the Kat, or the Ka, the spiritual or etheric twin to the physical form. Within the Ka body, there are pathways that can be stimulated and opened. The activation of these secret passages within the Ka brings it much greater power. The Alchemies of Horus are designed to strengthen these, to activate the latent powers and abilities of the initiate through what is called the Jed, or the ascending seven seals, what the yogis and yoganinis of India call the chakras. 12. Within the school in which I was trained, we learned how to activate the serpent power, moving it in specific paths in the spinal column and opening up circuits within the brain. This created what is called the urius. The urius is often a blue fire that extends up the spine both laterally and horizontally and into the brain, and as it undulates with the changes in energy within these pathways. The activation of the urius increases the brain's potential for intelligence, creativity, and most importantly, receptivity. For the task of the initiate is to change the quality of one's being, and that the attunement of the Ba or celestial soul is clear and unobstructed. 13. When I met Yeshua by the well for the first time, the mere proximity of his presence activated my internal alchemies. A serpent power moved up my spine as if I had practiced the disciplines I had learned. The first night when we were together, alone, arm in arm, lying next to each other, we practiced the sexual magic devices. This specific form of magic charges the Ka body with tremendous magnetic force through the power of physical orgasm, for when one has a sexual orgasm, there is a tremendous release of magnetic energy within the cells. As this energy spreads, it releases a magnetic potential that can be used. I wish to share the specifics of this, but in order to do so, I must explain more of a basic understanding of sex and spiritual realization, for this secret was stolen by the church. 14. When I, an initiate of Isis, joined together with Yeshua, there were specific pathways I had to open within myself. I was stunned, however, to discover that many of these pathways were spontaneously opening in his presence. I mentioned at the beginning of this story how I trembled as a woman, having to struggle with my own passions and desires, for the path of the initiate is to use the energy of passion in a highly specific way, and not to simply be carried off by it. For alchemy requires that energy be contained so that it can be transformed. Very quickly, Yeshua and I achieved this state, what is known as the 4 serpents. This occurs when both have mastered the internal alchemies of Horus to the extent that they can activate both the solar and the lunar serpents within the spines. Clairvoyantly, there is a central channel that runs up through the spine, and to the left there is a lunar circuit, and to the right a solar circuit called the Ida and the Pingula by the yogis and yogininis. In the Alchemies of Horus, one causes these 2 circuits to be activated by magnetic fields that are snake-like. The lunar snake on the left side is pitch black, the color of the void, so indeed it is the embodiment of the void itself and holds the potential as the creatix for all things. The solar serpent is gold. An initiate causes these 2 serpents to rise upward. As they rise upward, they pierce the chakras and cross over each other. In the Alchemy of Horus, these 2 serpents cross each other through the 5th seal or throat and all seals beneath. Then they face each other at the area approximately where the pineal gland is, or in the center of the head. Here a chalice is envisioned with the pineal gland at the very bottom of the chalice itself. These 2 serpents are living in that they are not static, but vibrate and scintillate and ripple with energy, and the writhings of the bodies within the Ka activate an increase of magnetic potential. There are specific practices which I will share at a later time, but what I wish to address in this moment is the practice of the 4 serpents. 15. When Yeshua and I made love, as you call it, we caused our serpents to rise up the spines, up our jed. We did this simultaneously, and at the moment of mutual orgasm, the charge released from the first seals in the pelvic area of our bodies was sent upward into the throne, which is the upper part of the head, higher brain centers. At the same time, during the moment of sexual ecstasy, we placed our awareness fully within our Ka bodies, for the Ka is strengthened by ecstasy. Ecstatic states are nourishing and strengthening to the Ka body, and as I said earlier, with each strengthening of the Ka, it becomes more magnetic, drawing to the initiate that which he or she desires. The sexual magic devices has to do with the innate ability of the feminine being to utilize magnetic energies to open deeper levels of consciousness through the act of surrendering to the sexual energies and pathways that are opened. When a woman is deeply loved and appreciated, as I by Yeshua, something lets go at the deepest levels of herself, and at the moment of orgasm there is an uncontrollable shuddering that takes place. If she feels safe and allows this shaking, this quivering to overtake her, there is a tremendous magnetic vortex that opens, the center of which is in her womb. 2 initiates engaged in the sexual magic devices can strengthen themselves and rapidly expand their consciousness through the power of this magnetic field. In the advanced practices of the sexual magic devices, the male initiate causes both of his serpents to rise through the ka body of the female, and the female causes her 2 serpents to rise through the ka body of the male. The explosive power of this practice is like the energy released by an atomic bomb. The massive tidal waves of magnetics can strengthen the ka beyond imagination or destroy it if not handled properly. It was this advanced practice of the ka that Yeshua engaged that night before the Garden of Gethsemane. For him, this tremendous increase of magnetic potential within his ka strengthened him for his hardship and for the task that faced him in his final initiation through the portal of death, so that when his physical body dissolved into the constituent elements, it was done so in a flash of light and heat, that the church calls the resurrection. But this was simply an effect of something that was occurring much deeper within him. It was caused by the magnetics of his ka body, for it was through his potentized ka that he journeyed through his underworld, through death itself. As Yeshua and I engaged the sexual practices of Isis in our relationship, we both understood that this was the purpose. For him, each union with me was a means to strengthen his ka. This is why I said earlier that he came to my well, for the well that the woman initiate offers to the male is an endless well of magnetic potential. But it is only opened when the female feels safe and loved. Only then will these practices work, for the practices without the nurturance of love become techniques and will not give the results required or desired. For me, I was both woman and initiate. I had been trained for years and knew what to do with the pathways, but I was surprised to find myself swept away as a woman. I found myself waiting in deepest anticipation for a look or a touch by Yeshua, and our times together alone were the most precious times I had ever experienced. Something about his touch and in his eyes, the feel of him, caused something within me to open, and I found myself sometimes almost laughing at myself. I, who had been trained in the most secret practices of the sex magic devices and had been judged by my priestesses to be very advanced, this initiate found herself a mere beginner in the presence of the woman. For I tell you now that within the heart and the mind and the body, wisdom of the feminine lies some of the greatest secrets and greatest powers, and they await to be revealed. And all of it is laid open by the touch of another. And so whenever I speak of Yeshua, I am overcome by my love and the feelings that I hold for him throughout all time. 16. The sex magic devices is based upon the realization that the feminine principle holds within her nature, specifically her sexual nature, an alchemical key. This alchemical key is revealed in the act of what you call love, sexual love. When this is activated strongly enough, the alchemies of Horus spontaneously present themselves. Within my training, it was understood that there were 2 paths, alchemically speaking, to the same goal. The alchemies of Horus were the foundation of both alchemies or practices, since the same fundamental pathways were used. For those who did not wish to engage in partnership, the alchemies of Horus would provide a means to strengthen and activate the ka body to the levels of high initiateship. For those in partnership, the sexual magic devices would provide the wings by which they would ascend the Jed and enter the throne of the highest consciousness. From my vantage point, I see a great tragedy in that the secrets and the holiness of our sexual natures was made evil by the church fathers. And for nearly 2,000 years now, the most dynamic and one of the most rapid ways to God realization has been made wrong. And I find it indeed ironic that the church has made it a sin and therefore terrified those who might have stumbled upon it. 17. While the miracles of Yeshua are considered extraordinary by many, they are from the standpoint of the initiate simply the expressions the natural expressions of the potential of consciousness. They are a sign. There are reasons for miracles, and I wish to discuss these from the standpoint of the initiatory knowledge that Yeshua and I possessed. By the time I met Yeshua, he had already demonstrating the signs. His level of creation was very high. My task was to assist him in strengthening his Ka body for his final initiation through the death portal to the high god Horus. This was accomplished, as I have said, through the sex magic devices and the Alchemies of Horus. Of all the miracles that I witnessed Yeshua perform, the one that is most dear to me is that of the loaves and the fishes. It was a long, hot day. The disciples, Mary, and myself were following the Master as usual. A very large crowd formed, listening intently upon every word from Yeshua's mouth. We were all enraptured by his vision and his means of expressing. It was as if for several hours we were transported into heaven itself, and I noticed that Yeshua's Ka had expanded to include everyone. Another sign. When he had completed his speaking, it was late in the afternoon, and filled with compassion for them, realizing that their walk home would take some of them several days, he called upon food to be gathered and shared. So the disciples, Mary and I, and a few others who joined us from the crowd began to collect food. But when it was all gathered, there were only a few fishes and a few small loaves of bread. Hardly enough. It was then that I witnessed a most remarkable event. Yeshua went inside and closed his eyes. I could feel the intent of the prayer, although I did not hear the words. Running the full course of his jed from the base of his spine to the top of his head, I clairvoyantly saw a burst of light flowing upwards through his crown into his ba, his celestial soul, and then an energy descended, as if in answer to his request, and he placed his hands over the two small baskets and began to hand out the loaves and fishes, breaking them into pieces and handing one to each person himself. It was most remarkable. Over 1,000 people were fed, and the loaves and fishes never exhausted themselves. After the crowd had been fed, Yeshua gave pieces to his disciples and to Mary and myself, and the bread had the most sweet taste, and the fish a wonderful flavor I had never experienced again. Such miracles are natural to a master of Yeshua's caliber, and from the initiatory standpoint, such miracles are the potential of anyone if they practiced what was required. 18. Yeshua often used the phrase, I and the Father are one. This has led to great misinterpretation, for from the initiatory standpoint, it is simply another word for spirit. And in these words, Yeshua was indicating that he merged with his spirit, and that is how the miracles were accomplished. And so he would go back and forth between two ideas, which the gospel reports in their own limited way. On one hand, Yeshua would sometimes say, I and the Father are one, and at other times he would say, without my Father I can do nothing. This is the oscillation that occurs with the initiatory process, in which the initiate oscillates between the strength and conviction of his or her connection to the spirit source and then to the other state of mind, in which they realize that they are nothing and can do nothing without spirit. So the one state of mind has a feeling of omnipotence, and the other state of mind has the feeling of impotence. And the initiate must pass between these two. That Yeshua used these phrases several times indicated to me as a fellow initiate that he was in the middle of this paradox. And he lived with this paradox in consciousness until the Garden of Gethsemane, for it was before his time in the garden, as reported by his disciples, that he came to me, and we practiced the 4 serpents for the last time. There was an intensity in our time together, for we both knew that the time was near at hand. With the explosive force released with the practice, Yeshua's Ka body scintillated with power and conviction, which he took with him into the final hours of his life, fortifying him for his journey through death. But the time before were often spent, I search for the right words, in a kind of self-questioning. Those who followed Yeshua, who call themselves Christians, like to think that he was sure-footed and always clear about his purpose and mission, and that he never wavered. But I, who spent the nights with him, tell you otherwise. Just because a being has attained a level of mastery does not mean that they are able to pass through uncertainty untouched. Yeshua felt the presence of his celestial soul, but it was an odd thing being an initiate, for one is human with all that goes with it, and one is increasingly connected to and a part of one's celestial soul. It is the Ba, the celestial soul, that is the voice of God speaking. The high initiate acts like a reflex from the mouth of God, but just because the celestial soul is clear does not mean that the human is necessarily so. Yeshua saw in others the potential for God realization, and he spoke to this several times. One of these was mentioned in the Gospels when he said, "You shall do greater things than me." For he understood that miracles are a natural expression of consciousness, and that as the consciousness of mankind expanded, miracles would be commonplace. And yet at the same time, he was very aware of the limitations of those around him, of their addiction to hatred, ignorance, and bigotry, and this troubled him deeply. We spent many evenings talking about this, and until a few days before Gethsemane, he was not sure if he could attain what was required to pass through the final initiation. I do not know the reason for the change in him, but a few days before the garden in our final initiatory act together through the 4 serpents, a deep sense of peace came over him, and he was sure in a way I had never seen him. 19. I stand in time nearly 2,000 years after Yeshua's crucifixion, and still I shake at the thought of that. It was very strange to be both the initiate and the woman. As the initiate, I stood by Yeshua through the crucifixion, holding my cot in fervent prayer, which is another way of saying I held steadfast in my intention to be there for him as he passed into death. This was an initiatory action on my part that required detachment. As a trained initiate, such a task was easy, but as the woman in love with Yeshua, the man, my heart was ripped apart. And so I stood at Golgotha, wavering in my strength as an initiate, and my grief as the woman in love whose beloved was suffering. In that moment, I did not care for the initiation. I did not care that Yeshua was lying a trail of light through the death realms for all those who would follow him. I even yelled at Isis. "How dare you?" I said. In the greatest moment of my torment, Mary reached out and touched my hand. I had been alone in my grief and had not noticed hers. Our eyes met, filled with tears, and we sobbed in each other's arms, she for her son, and I for my beloved. The Gospels report that an earthquake struck right after Yeshua's passing, and I say to you that this is true. It was as if all of nature went into travel, and the earth shook with rage and anger, and that such a master, such a being, could suffer at the hands of his fellow men. But such is the paradox of life on earth. A great storm came across the city as well, winds like I had not seen. The sky filled with dark clouds and bolts of lightning, the sound of thunder shaking everything. This horrific display lasted, it seemed, forever. But I suspect it was only for an hour or so. At the tomb, Mary and I washed his body in accordance with Jewish ritual and tradition, wrapped him, and left the tomb. We did this in silence. The only sound? The sound of our muffled tears. I thought it odd that he had been able to raise Lazarus from the dead, but not have been able to help himself. I did not understand what he was doing, but after his resurrection, I saw him in his ka, radiant and beautiful as ever, and I understood. From the initiatory standpoint, to become the high god Horus means that one has activated the highest potentials of consciousness within the human form. But this was traditionally done for oneself only. But Yeshua had done it on behalf of all mankind. This was his legacy. But I say to you, it has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with physics and alchemy. The simple teaching of Yeshua was that we are all gods, that we all have within us the power to love and the power to heal, and he demonstrated this the best he could. In the early days of the church, meaning the community of those who formed around Yeshua's teachings, a most beautiful ritual emerged. Those who wished to continue to be in his energy or presence would share bread and wine. Sometimes the men would share the ritual and sometimes the women. The simple act of sharing among each other was in keeping with Yeshua's intent, and yet as the years progressed, the simplicity of this got lost, and only those ordained by the church could give communion, something which Yeshua would find most distasteful. Having known him as well as I did, I can tell you this. The truth and power of Yeshua's teaching has been perverted by the church, and the secrets of the elevation of consciousness through sacred sex, as practiced by I and Yeshua, has been stolen by the church. I realize in the sharing of my story that only a handful will understand, but that is enough. 20. I wish now to reveal some of the secrets of the sex magic devices. As I said earlier, it is possible to scale the heights of consciousness alone, without partnership, and in this, the Alchemies of Horus were designed to assist the initiate. However, for those in partnership, sacred relationship, the sex magic devices was revealed. There are several aspects to this I wish to discuss. The first of these is the understanding that at the moment of orgasm, magnetic fields are generated. In truth, these fields are created through what you would call foreplay, the stimulation of the senses through touch. This sensory stimulation begins the process of building the magnetic fields and is crucial to the alchemy practice of sex magic. There are several methods available to initiates, and I will discuss some of these, but essential to the practice is the understanding of the nature of the interaction of the two alchemical elements within the man and the woman. On a mundane level, the semen of the man carries the information of his genetic lineage, which is passed on to the child. When the sperm within his semen joins the egg of the woman, life is created, and life is a complex interconnecting of magnetic fields. The growing child within the womb develops organs and systems, but at the magnetic level, these can be viewed as interconnecting, complex, vibrational, and magnetic fields. And so at the mundane level, the act of sex creates new patterns of magnetics. Initiates trained in alchemy use the sexual energy to also create complex magnetic fields, but these fields do not become a new being, a child. They become incorporated into the ka body of the two initiates themselves, strengthening and elevating their ka bodies. This is the first essential point to understand. Everything revolves around this. The task of the initiate within the system that Yeshua and I were trained in is to strengthen the ka body beyond the confines of the physical form, or ka. The next level to understand has to do with the emotional tuning of the female initiate, for the female initiate's receptivity is dependent upon her emotional state. This is part of her nature and cannot be sidestepped if these techniques are to work. Essential to the female initiate is the authentic feeling of safety and love, or appreciation at the very least. When these are in place, something within her being lets go and allows the alchemy to occur. The alchemy is created by the joining of the male initiate's ka and the female initiate's ka. As they make love, the ka bodies interconnect, and this causes the female to open her magnetic floor. This is a strange term. It comes from the language used in the temple of Isis. The floor is the foundation upon one stands. When we set something to be secure, we place it on the floor. So the floor was used as a type of slang within the temples, referring to the very basic piece that is required. So when I say the female's magnetic floor, I am saying that this is the fundamental piece that has to occur. As the two initiates continue in their lovemaking, and as the passion of their connecting increases, powerful chemicals are released in the brain and the body. These transport the initiates into another space than their normal ways of being. This further opens the magnetic fields and generates an increase in magnetics. There are two options to the male initiate at the moment of orgasm. He can ejaculate or hold his seed. If he ejaculates and the previous conditions have been met, there is an instantaneous reaction that occurs within the womb of the female. As the energetic essence of his sperm strikes the walls of her inner sanctum, there is an explosion of magnetic energy, worlds within worlds spinning, And to the extent that the male initiate has attained a high status as well as the female, the magnetics released from such contact between sexual fluids can be enormous. So it is important to understand that this creates complex magnetics that both the male and the female can draw into their bodies. A second phenomena occurs in which the female initiate may begin to shake uncontrollably. As she shakes the center of it, usually the womb itself, which sets off a cascade, a rocking effect in the pelvis. This action also creates very complex magnetic fields, again, which the male and female initiates can draw into their ka bodies. This is the fundamental or basic understanding. As the initiates, it is possible to also cause the serpent powers to rise within the spine during the sex act, and wherever the two serpents meet, will tend to magnetize that chakra and its attendant abilities or powers. More than this, I am not permitted to say, since the attainment of this practice can lead to a significant increase in one's powers. I leave it to those who read this to see between the lines. If you are ready for this practice, you will know how it's done. 21. In the training of both the sex magic devices and the Alchemies of Horus, initiates would be trained in the basic exercises of the two serpents. In this practice, the initiate alone generates enough through the power of Ra, or the internal fire, to create an elevation in awareness, to create complex magnetic fields within his or her own body, and then to bring these into the ka. I wish to share this method. It is the core practice for those who wish to do this work alone, and for those who wish to do this work in partnership. The fundamental practice requires that the initiate sit upright, breathing in a rhythmic, calm manner. Then the initiate becomes aware of the base of the spine, and on the breaths, draws the black serpent rising from the left and the gold serpent rising from the right up the spine. As the two serpents enter each chakra, they cross over, making their way up to the crown. But in this practice, the two serpents are brought up to the center of the head, to the vicinity of the pineal gland. The initiate then, using the power of the breath, sends the energy of the inhales into the serpents, and then with the exhale sends the energy of the breath deeper into the serpentine bodies, causing them to become alive, so to speak. Eventually they will writhe or move from the power of the breath in the intention of the initiate. At this point, a chalice is imagined inside the head with the two serpents facing off each other at the lip, the pineal gland resting at the bottom of the chalice. The next phase draws the energy of the Ra upward. The initiate imagines a ball of fire, like the sun, at the solar plexus, and with each exhale, the initiate silently repeats or intones the sound of Ra. This causes the light, the fire of the internal Ra, to be activated, and it spontaneously begins to move up. As this light and heat move upward, it passes through the center of the chalice between the two serpents, up to the crown of the head. From here, a most remarkable phenomenon occurs. From the left side of the crown, an energy descends that is liquid-like in nature. This liquid is called the red serpentine drops. From the right side of the crown, another liquid-like energy moves down into the chalice called the white serpentine drops. It is the heat and light of the internal Ra. It is the heat and light of the internal Ra that causes the crown to secrete these substances. The red serpentine drops are related to the biological mother of the initiate. The white serpentine drops are related to the father of the initiate. As the two mix together, several things can occur. There can be the sensation of a sweet taste in the back of the throat, what the yogis and yogininis call Amrita, at which we in the Isis cult refer to as the spring waters, for they seem to come from the spring within the head. Sometimes this is the first presentation, and if an initiate focuses upon the sensation of the spring waters, a kind of ecstasy arises. Sometimes the initiate senses light in their head. Again, if they focus upon this light, a kind of ecstasy arises. Sometimes as the red and white serpentine drops mix, there is a spontaneous arising of ecstasy. This ecstasy, no matter what caused it, is crucial to the alchemy, for ecstasy is food and nourishment to the ka body. There is a tendency for this ecstasy to remain in the high centers, since this is where they were birthed in this practice. But in this method, upon the first arising of ecstasy, the initiate must shift his or her awareness to the entire ka body itself. This causes the ecstasy to spread throughout the entire physical body, kat, or then is absorbed by the ka, strengthening and revitalizing it. This is the basic fundamental practice. For those in partnership practicing the sex magic devices, the ecstatic states naturally arise. For those in the solitary practice, the ecstasy must be self-generated. Both practices, however, require that the initiate become aware of the ka during moments of ecstasy so that the ka body can partake of the rich magnetic fields created by such bliss. 22. In a very real sense, the male initiate faces the greatest challenges in the practice of sex magic devices, for it requires that he seemingly go against his own nature. By nature, the male is electric from an alchemical standpoint, while the female is magnetic. It is the nature of electricity to move and to act, while it is the nature of magnetics to nest and fold. In the practice, the focus becomes the strengthening of the ka body through the incorporation of magnetic fields released by the sex act. Right after orgasm, the magnetic fields generated by the female initiate continue to unspiral and circulate. This is a time to rest and be with the magnetics, but by nature, males tend to either get up and do something or to go to sleep. So the male initiate must train himself to nest, to allow the magnetics that have been created to spiral into his ka and his body. This is different from what normally occurs, for in the male, orgasm is confined to the pelvic area, and in some cases it spreads. But for the female initiate, especially one who has been able to relax into the experience, the orgasm spreads through the entire body and can continue in various levels of intensity for several hours. Some male initiates might be concerned that by changing themselves, by nesting, they will become less masculine, but I can assure you that nothing can be further from the truth. For the truth is that as the male initiate nests in the magnetics, his ka body becomes stronger and his sexual energy becomes more potent. One of the tasks for the male initiate is to sensitize himself to new levels of feeling so that he can incorporate the magnetic fields released through sex into his own body and ka. To clarify the term nesting, it does not mean that the male's member remains inside the female necessarily. It does mean that the male remains close to the female, touching, stroking, being with the physical sensations and the emotions after orgasm. It is through the portal of nesting that the male initiate is able to enter the feminine mysteries of creation. Another aspect that the male initiate needs to be aware of is what is called adoration of the beloved. As the alchemy of the sex magic becomes stronger, there are certain signs that occur. One of these signs is that the beloved becomes adored or cherished. This happens both for the male and the female initiate. When adoration of the beloved occurs from both partners, the alchemy in sex magic greatly intensifies, for the harmonics and magnetics created by such emotion are very beneficial to the magic. 23. I would like to speak to the term magic at this time. The reason the term magic is used refers to the transformation of the individual human into a god. This is indeed magic. It is symbolized by the god Horus, part man, part hawk, and through the practices of alchemy is raised to the status of the high god Horus, meaning that one has attained the most elevated states of consciousness. So the sex magic devices is precisely a method for the elevation of consciousness, which is in itself magic. And this is done through the energies and ecstasies created through sex. The other reason the term magic is used is there are methods, once the ka body is potentized, that one can use to affect one's reality in very direct ways in methods that may seem magical. Take, for instance, the basic core practices of the Alchemies of Horus, the raising of the black and gold serpents up the spine, the creation of the chalice, the activation of the internal fire of Ra, and the meeting of the red and white serpentine drops are all acts of magic, acts of intent in both personal and spiritual will. This is why it is referred to as magic. Returning to the paradox facing the male initiate, we find that his nature works against him to a certain extent in these practices, specifically the sex magic. For once a male initiate's ka is charged, he by nature wants to act, to do something. Yet if he can discipline himself, train himself to continue lying with his beloved, he can nest himself in the rich magnetics created through their love, their sex, and strengthen the ka to a greater extent. 24. There is another aspect facing the male initiate in this practice, and it has to do with what we in the temples refer to as obstacles to flight, but which in your language is best stated as psychological issues. The term obstacles to flight refers to hindrances to the unfolding of one's Horus nature, the aspects specifically that can fly upward into elevated states of consciousness. There are attitudes, beliefs, and emotional habits that are counterproductive to flight, or the elevation to consciousness, which is what we refer to when we say obstacles to flight. It is here for the male initiate that one of the most intricate passages requiring great skill occurs. As a child, the male was carried by his mother in her womb and protected and nurtured by his mother in his infancy, until a point where he had autonomy and could act for himself. At this point, the male child pushes the mother away, so to speak, in order to face the world. It is at this juncture in his development that he may feel confined or limited by his mother, and a battle of wills can ensue. As a man, as a male initiate, he may still carry these emotional habits with him. If this is the case, he will find it difficult to relax into the nesting of the magnetic fields, since at a psychological level, it is experienced as surrendering to the feminine. If the male initiate has issues with his mother of childhood, he may engage these consciously or unconsciously with his partner. 25. It is important for both initiate undertaking the sex magic devices to realize that they are embarking on a long journey and that the process is essentially one of alchemy. The purpose of alchemy is to transform one substance into another. It does this by burning off the dross or the negativity of a substance so that the pure substance remains or is created. In the process of sex magic devices, the substances transformed are literally the sexual fluids, hormones, neurotransmitters, and other substances not yet discovered by your science. But it also involves a transformation of one's psychology. By nature, the sex magic devices steps up the alchemical process. The heat gets turned up, so to speak. The dross becomes clear. That which needs to be purified becomes painfully into focus. If one does not understand that this is one of the byproducts of alchemy, one might be disturbed by the arising of difficult psychological material. But actually, this is one of the results, for the internal pressure created through the intense alchemy generated through the sex magic devices causes the ka body to extrude and press out of itself all impurities and to clear itself of all obstacles to flight. In those practicing alone without a partner, the Alchemies of Horus also create internal pressure, excluding impurities, but the task is more difficult in that the energy required comes from one's own personal efforts, and there is not the benefit of reflection from another. However, it can be done. 26. This is the basic understanding required for the practice of the sex magic devices. In the previous pages, I have revealed to you the secrets of the ages, one of the most closely guarded secrets of the temples of Isis. Understanding of these practices was reserved for the most advanced students. Whether one practices the solitary path through the Alchemies of Horus or the path of sacred relationship through the sex magic devices, one is stepping upon the road to godhood. The central key in this journey is the strengthening of the ka through ecstatic states of consciousness, whether self-generated or created through the ecstasy of sex does not inherently matter. The ka is nurtured and potentized by ecstatic states regardless of their source. On the contrary, shame is a poison to the ka body, a toxic element that decreases its vitality and potency. I, an initiate of Isis, find it tragic that the church has shamed women and men around their sexual natures and closed a door on one of the most direct paths to God realization. Whatever you do along this path, my advice is to free yourself of all shame. Search out the catacombs of your own mind and heart. Seek out the dark places in yourself where shame resides and remove it. Find every opportunity to create ecstasy, for it strengthens you and potentizes the ka. May the obstacles to your flight be few and the blessings along your journey be many. 27. I wish now to turn my attention to some loose threads concerning the practice of alchemy and the sex magic devices. For the male initiate, it is essential to understand that it is the magnetic fields created first by the touching and stroking of the female initiate, his beloved, that starts the cascade of magnetic fields, building in intensity to the point of orgasm. It is important that the male initiate train himself to be able to nest in the magnetic fields. It is extremely important to both initiates to place their attention on the ka body during the ecstatic states of consciousness that are generated by their lovemaking, for this strengthens and potentizes the ka body, and this is essential for this type of alchemy, as was practiced by I and Yeshua. At the moment of physical orgasm, there is a tendency for the magnetic surge to move either up through the top of the head or down through the feet. But in either case, this magnetic field exits the body and dissipates. It is important during the moment of orgasm to contain the magnetic field or surge. Ideally, the initiate would place his awareness in the upper throne or the upper brain centers. This would cause the surge of orgasm to rise up into the head, sending its energy into the brain itself and into the ka body. 28. There are times when the male initiate may wish to hold back his seed. Within the sex magic devices, male initiates were taught a specific practice called stopping the lower Nile. From the initiatory knowledge of ancient Egypt, the Nile existed both externally and internally, the external Nile being the physical river and the internal Nile being the Jed, and its flow through the 7 seals or chakras. At the moment of physical orgasm, when a man ejaculates, the creative powers that have descended from the upper Nile into the lower Nile are released. This semen carries great potential for creating magnetic fields in the form of new life, or an alchemical reaction in the womb of the female initiate, as we discussed earlier. At times, however, a male initiate may wish to hold his seed, primarily because, depending upon his vitality, ejaculation may actually decrease his energy, and it was for these times that the techniques for stopping the lower Nile was developed. The male places a finger over the prostate just in front, so that at the moment of ejaculation the semen goes back instead of forward, and the magnetic fields of his sexual essence recirculate through his body and his ka. But even in these moments there are magnetic fields generated by his ka, which interact with those of the female initiate, and they can both nest within these interactions. 29. And now I wish to address a relatively rare form of partnership, but which sometimes occurred within the initiates of Isis. You would call this same-sex partners. While the building of magnetic fields and the nesting in these fields and the arising of ecstatic states can be created through same-sex partners, the interaction of semen and the womb does not occur, and so this aspect of alchemy is not present. However, all other aspects of alchemy and the sex magic are relevant. 30. Finally, I wish to turn my attention to the term initiate, for I have used this term extensively throughout this material. The term initiate refers to one who has decided to live upward in consciousness, one who has decided to leave behind the mundane life and to enter into an adventure of consciousness. Generally speaking, the crossing of the threshold from mundane to sacred life is marked by a ritual of initiation. In the ancient practices, a candidate would be initiated by a priest or priestess, and this priest or priestess would have the power to confer upon that individual the relative power of the lineage to which they belong. In certain types of transitions, an external initiator is needed or required. However, for the beginning phases, it is possible for a person to initiate themselves, for the true essence of initiation means to mark a threshold, the crossing from mundane life into sacred life. For those who feel drawn to practice the Alchemies of Horus and wish to mark their commitment to living the sacred life, I offer this simple ritual. I give this instruction because there is such a scarcity of qualified persons to conduct initiations into the ancient lineages of Egypt. For this ritual, one would need a candle and 2 glasses or cups. One cup is filled with water and the other is empty. If you wish, you could add flowers and incense, making the ritual as aesthetically pleasing as you desire. But fundamentally, self-initiation is an act of intention and personal and spiritual will. The ritual is simply an external reflection of something that is occurring deep within oneself. And indeed, this internal choice can be made without the need for an external ritual at all, for the ritual without internal choice is worthless. For this ritual, you would light the candle and then speak these words. Spirit of all life, be my witness here. For the sake of my own elevation and the elevation of all life, I shall strive to be harmless to myself and all others. Then, holding the glass or container of water in your right hand, you would pour the water into the container or glass in the left hand, and by these words you would seal this action. By the pouring of this water, I signify the transfer of my sacred waters of life, from the mundane to the sacred, Spirit of all life, by my witness here. Amen, amen, amen. 31. I wish to end my story with thoughts about my beloved Yeshua. As an initiate of Isis, I had been trained for the moment when I met him, and from the moment our eyes met, I was transported into other worlds. I understood the teachings that had been obscure. I understood the deepest secrets of Isis as she revealed them to me, not through sacred writings, but through the living presence of my love for Yeshua. As the alchemy between us intensified, I came to adore him and he me. It was a great difficulty for him to part from me. There were stirrings within him that longed to be with me rather than to face the death initiation of Horus. Yet as a master soul, he had come to lay a trail of light through the dark realms of death. He did this for his own sake and for the sake of all mankind. There are many who misunderstood what he did and why he did it. There are those who believe that all they need to do is believe in him and no effort on their part is required. This was never Yeshua's belief or understanding. He came as a shower of light, a beacon of love, at a time when the world was still in the shadow of a jealous God. Yeshua, as a master soul, demonstrated immense courage and strength to teach love at such a time. It was odd for me, being both the initiate and the woman in love, for I understood that my task was to assist him to build his ka, in order that he could face the realms of death with greater power. As an initiate, I understood my task, and to some extent, I understood what Yeshua's vision was. But as the woman in love, I was swept away by my feelings for my beloved. So I stand in time, looking back, as it were, upon our life together, and it is a bittersweet taste. The sweetness of Yeshua's presence will for always fill and sustain me. Yet the bitterness of our parting will always be there as well. In my last days upon this earth, Yeshua came to me again in his ka body, and he had done so for many years. He was with me when I took my last breath and took my ka through the realms of death, through the trail of light that he had laid through the power of his intention, and took me into what you would call heaven, but is a place in the soul. I rest in this place with his presence through all time and space. 32. I was content to remain here with his essence that I carry in my heart and mind, but Isis herself came to me and said that now I must tell my story, that the lies of the last 2,000 years must come to an end, and the feminine is returning in balance to the male, and the cosmic mother is revealing herself at the beginning of the ending of time. And so it is that I reveal one of the lost secrets of the ages, that spirit, the male principle, in order to return to itself through its journey into matter, requires the assistance of the feminine principle, the intelligence of matter itself. But from the solar light filled perspective of the masculine principle, the feminine principle carries within her a dark, moist, and dangerous abyss. The solar principle feels threatened by the darkness of the lunar aspect, but it is in the joining of the sun and the moon, the joining of the masculine and the feminine principles in equilibrium, in energetic balance, that true illumination is attained. When Yeshua prepared himself with me for his ordeal before the Garden of Gethsemane, I was the embodiment of Isis. I was she. There was no difference between her and myself. I had been trained in the practices that would ensure this. And so Yeshua, as the sun, the solar principle manifest in the realms of matter, joined with me the moon, and he was joined with Isis herself, and his elevation could not have occurred without her. She is the cosmic mother. Other cultures call her by other names, but she is the same. To the extent that the male initiate is able to nest into the magnetic fields with his beloved and draw into himself the vibrational energies of these magnetics, to this extent he is making contact with Isis herself, the cosmic mother, the creatrix of all time and space. To the extent that the female initiate is able to surrender to the magnetics and the letting go into her own nature, she becomes Isis herself. When these two events occur at a cosmological level, the male initiate becomes energetically attuned to Osiris, the female initiate becomes attuned to Isis, and out of the commingling of their magnetic fields, Horus is born. Except that Horus in this case does not take form as a child. Horus takes form and Horus takes flight within the ka bodies of the initiates themselves. They are raised up in a real manner. They can take flight within the celestial realms of their own being. The truth is that Osiris cannot rise without Isis, nor Isis without Osiris. The high god Horus is birthed from the magnetics of their joining. The male initiate, being electric by nature, thinks he can make it happen by himself, but he cannot. Isis waits for him to recognize this, but he does not. For centuries she has waited, and now we are at the beginning of the ending of time, and the pressure is strong. This is one of the reasons I have come forward. To those male initiates able to find the pathways in themselves, to surrender to the Isis powers carried within the natures of their beloved, or carried within their own natures, if practicing the solitary path, know that you do this not just for yourself, but for all mankind. When one undertakes the sex magic of Isis, it is not possible to do just for oneself, for the practices quickly elevate the initiate into the level of the living myth. For in its highest expressions, as we have indicated before, the male initiate becomes Osiris himself, and the female initiate becomes Isis, and the Horus is birthed out of their magnetics. For those engaged in the solitary practice of alchemy, this is accomplished through the magnetics of the lunar and solar circuits. As the basic practice shared earlier is mastered, the black serpent of the moon, holding the essence of the void, quivers and shakes within the ka body of the initiate, much like the female initiate quivers and shakes within the arms of the male when practicing the sex magic. Within the initiate practicing the solitary way, the gold serpent of the sun meets the black serpent of the moon in the center of the head, and the magnetic fields created by their commingling and the energetic reactions created by their intersections through the chakras or seals creates the Horus. So whether it is done alone or with another does not intrinsically matter, but what must occur in both is the same. The sun and the moon must be in balance, and then the illumination, what we call Horus, occurs. 33. I have offered you my story and the teachings I have been giving in deepest hopes that you will find a passage into your own greatness, for that is what this world needs now more than ever. It is my hope that you will be uplifted by my insights and that you will be inspired as I was by the magnificent being you call Yeshua, but that I call my beloved. To those who have the courage to practice the alchemies of Horus, and for those who choose to live in sacred relationship with themselves or with another, I give my blessing. May the blessing of the Cosmic Mother follow you upon your journey to yourself. May the path between the sun and the moon be revealed. Spirit of all life, bear witness. Amen. Mary Magdalene.